or Necromancers. It's very, very, very important to keep in mind that the Necromancers have a passive that is designed around critical chance. With that said, that's why I went both Hunting Rage on the stamina version, as well as the hybrid, as well as going into Julianos for the crit, because as Necromancer, the kit itself has no crit. I mean, has no execute, right? There isn't an execute, there isn't a CC, there are no buffs outside of your major buff that you gain right here. So everything else that you need, like critical passive, mobility, has to be gained externally. With that said, that's why I went with Huntings, because they have a passive called Death Kneel, right? So this is why I put the little asterisk there. It says Hunting's Rage pairs well with Necromancer because of the passive called Death Kneel and the near death experience. Both are critical percent passives that increase in proportion to how low your enemy's health is, or how low your HP is. Having a higher base crit increases the benefit of the passive along with channeled acceleration, so that we have access, so that when we crit our enemy at low health, they die. Since Necromancer has no execute skill, Death Kneel in essence acts as an execute passive. That's why I put these little tips here. I decided to go with the Hunt's Leader because I already tested it. Blast Bones will proc the Hunt's Leader, so you'll gain extra HP as well as extra stamina. This is roughly equivalent to about a base of 400 and change. Let me just double check that. Right, so it's 2660, 2603, and that happens every that happens every 5 seconds, so we'll multiply that by 2, and so we get 5,206 over the course of 10 seconds. We'll divide that by 5 because regen happens every 2 seconds, so this happens over 10 seconds, so we'll go ahead and we'll divide that by 5, and in essence, in normal overworld, it's equivalent to about 1,041 in terms of regen, in quotes, and of course in PvP we have to divide that by 2, so that's in essence giving you an extra 520 HP regen on top of our already 859 regen, on top of the ticks we get from Rally. I am using Rally as my burst heal, and then of course we can still utilize Mortal Coil primarily for the stam regen and a little bit of HP regen. And of course you're also going to get a little bit of HP regen from the Spirit Mender, but we're using the Spirit Mender for the damage reduction, so that makes our healing ticks 10% stronger because we're taking 10% less damage. On top of that, we're utilizing things like Hex, or you can utilize whichever morph that you feel more comfortable with for removing CCs. For removing the negative status effects. Since you don't need the regen, I would go with the one that removes 4 instead of using the one that removes 2, because as you can clearly see, 1854 regen plus the extra regen that we're getting from the set is more than enough on top of the regen that we're getting from Mortal Coil. And again, Mortal Coil is equivalent to, I believe, 474 regen. So that in essence puts our stamina regen in no CP in the range of, I'd say, about 2500 in medium armor, right? And our HP regen between ticks from Mortal Coil, ticks from Rally, and the ticks that we're getting from the Mender, as well as the HP that we're getting from the set, from the Hunt, is really realistically putting this at around, comfortably, I would say 2k. I think it's actually a little more. I haven't done the numbers, but typically from Rally you're going to get about 800 every tick. Mortal Coil is probably going to come in at around 150, and I believe you're going to get roughly the same amount from the Mender on top of an additional this is basically the equivalent because it's not hindered by Battle Spirit, so that's going to give us another 500, right? After Battle Spirit we're getting 5, and then we're getting another 8 here, and then of course roughly I'd say about 300 between the two of these. So that's going to comfortably put our HP regen, again in quotes, at around, in combat wise, we're talking about 2k comfortably. And of course our stamina regen, I would say comfortably, is going to sit when we're, especially when we're fighting, at around 2500 in no CP. And of course we want the damage reduction version because our health is a little low. Again, this is a medium armor build, but I designed this build for mobility with the channeled acceleration, on top of utilizing medium armor. On top of, one of the traits that I went with was the swift trait. So we're gonna have basically two options because I'm running a bow on the back bar. So we have two different options to gain the major expedition, either via magicka or via dodge roll on the back bar with bow, basically keeping our uptime on major expedition roughly to 100%. And of course that will give us a mobility. We'll be basically moving with the swift at about 36% extra speed, and of course with the medium armor, that's going to give us a lot of reduction. I went with really high weapon damage to maximize the amount of healing ticks, and of course to maximize the amount of damage that we're coming in. Since this is a medium armor build, we are going to be, in my opinion, it would be a little bit squishier than, of course, running the sword and shield build. But I feel that this build will play very comfortably between dodge roll, between the ability to remove negative effects, along with the high HP regen between all of the different sources of HP. It's also important to keep in mind, like I said before, as our HP gets a little lower, or as our opponent's HP gets a little lower, our critical chance, right? This is critical percent. So we're sitting at 36. The 0.4 is irrelevant. So we're going to be sitting at 36%. Because we're going to be running the blast bones, that's going to give us an extra 10% critical chance to our healing. That affects, like I said, death kneel, as well as the near-death experience, increases the chance to crit with all sources of healing. That includes the two different sources of magicka healing that we're going to get from the Spirit Mender and of course from Mortal Coil, but obviously it does affect our critical hits, our critical chance ticks from Rally as well. It also affects the critical damage. Like I said, I've tested this. When your opponent gets below 25%, basically all of your abilities, depending upon how many abilities you have from, I believe this is in, I believe the skill is in, here we go, in the Gravelord. No. Yeah, it's in the Gravelord. So the Gravelord passive is based on the number of abilities you have slotted. So for each Gravelord ability slotted will increase your critical chance by 10% when hitting an opponent once below 25% HP. So it works better. You're going to gain more of this on Magicka Necromancer. As you can see on my Magicka Necromancer, I'm running 1, 2, 3 abilities. So once my opponent gets below 25%, I'm basically guaranteed a critical strike against them, which is why I went Julianos, and which is why I went with Minor Force as well as the Shadow Mundus to maximize those passives, because these passives affect our spell critical damage as well as our spell critical healing. Like I said, this setup works just fine because it takes into, you can see the regen here. HP regen is almost 1100. We're running 1200 stam regen and 1864 magicka regen, and you can see our stats here. We're running 3300 spell damage, 41% base crit, and we're running 73% critical damage. So when we crit, you're going to crit hard with 6384 into pen. The physical resistance is a little low, but because we're running really high critical and really high spell damage, you're going to get a lot of healing from the Mender as well as healing from Mortal Coil. This legitimately gives me an extra 600 plus HP regen. It ticks for around 3 to almost 500 on a crit. And of course, Spirit Mender, I've gotten 4k ticks, right? It ticks 4 times, right? Because this ability lasts 8 seconds. So typically, you're going to get a minimum of 10,000 for a cast. It ticks for me at 2400, and I've gotten 4k, a little over 4k on a critical tick. Again, we are running 41%, so out of the 4 ticks that you get, more than likely 2 of them are going to crit. which means that you're going to get between 10,000 as well as, I'd say, upwards of 15, 16k HP from the ability here. And of course, the Mortal Coil ticks every half second, so you're going to get a lot of HP from this. But as long as these two abilities are up, you do not need a damage shield. Granted, if you get ulti dumped by multi people, it doesn't matter who you are, unless you're like a OP Magicosaur, you're stacking 3 shields, you're typically going to die. A CC into like a double ult, like a double Dawnbreaker and a Shulk, you're going to eat a lot of damage. You really need to keep the abilities up 100% of the time, and of course keep your enemies debuffed from the minor maim from the Ghostly Embrace. It helps to give you a little bit of cushion to both root and of course keep people defiled. The primary problem is not with the build, it is with the class itself, because Blast Bones is just not reliable. If it was more reliable like Frags, then you would see I would have a lot more. With this build, I would say you're not going to put up big numbers, right? You're not going to see big numbers at the end of your match where you're pulling, 800k plus. The reason being is that people will just melt. So you're not trading very long with people because you're just bursting people constantly. It's like you don't see a lot of Stam Blades and Mag Blades, melee Mag Blades, put out a lot of overall damage because they're just bursting their opponents down. The difference being with, like, for example, Mag DK lacks an execute, and a lot of their damage are dots, and of course they're AoE, so you have this overinflated, recap of how much damage you're doing at the end of a deathmatch. This is typically going to put out just so much damage that your opponents are just going to die because they can't maintain healing, so you're not trading for very long. But because Blast Bones is so inconsistent, sometimes it will just not move forward, and it moves forward so slowly that it really doesn't benefit the Necromancer, because people literally can outrun the ability, as well as, of course, the ability can be focused, because you can literally kill the Blast Bone before it even begins to walk forward. So for the Magicka Necromancer, it poses a problem and a huge DPS loss, because this will typically hit for about 5k, 5.5k. I have hit upwards of 9100 on a crit when someone got low, and so that poses a huge DPS loss, because you're not going to kill people with just 2 abilities, especially when one of them is just a CC, and this is expensive to continually recast. So really your rotation is going to be, Ricochet into Blast Bones and CCing them when they're available to be CC'd. You're not going to keep spamming this because this is highly expensive, unless you're running, the Maelstrom staff that reduces the cost of Flame Clench. Stamcrow, on the other hand, doesn't have that problem because it casts the ability when you're up close. So you would gap close into a Blighted Blast Bones into a Dizzy Swing. So typically a lot of your damage is going to come between, your light attack, critical rush, into a Dizzy Swing, light attack, and then basically the Blast Bones is going to be like your finisher, because you're not going to need to run an execute, because you'll be passively executing with critical damage once your opponent gets low. And of course you have your light and heavy attacks from your bow bar, and of course critical rush. Actually, I'm running Stampede. The reason I chose Stampede was to make it easier for the Blighted Blast Bones to land, since it's really slow. So the little slow that we get from Stampede will help the Blighted Blast Bones to land a little better on classes that are, for example, slightly mobile, like a Magicosaur or a Stam Sword, who are very mobile. So this helps to keep them within range of the Blast Bones to minimize the problems associated with the pathing. And of course, critical Dizzy Swing does quite a bit of damage. On this particular build, it's probably coming in around 13k and no CP. So we have enough ability to deal damage here with this ability. With that said, let's go ahead and we're going to start getting into